Hi everyone, it's Jerry. I have an instructive game to share with you from the 1957 United States Open. On the white end, 14-year-old Bobby Fischer playing against William Addison. In this event, Fischer finished 4th, and I believe it acted as excellent prep for him. Just a few months later, he competed in the United States Championship, an event he ended up winning, making him the youngest U.S. champion ever. Now, regarding William Addison, I'm not quite sure of his playing strength for this event. If I had to guess, he's around master level. In 1967, Addison was awarded the International Master title. On board, Caro-Kann Defense, 2 knights, attack. There's going to be an emphasis in this game on the endgame, king and pawn endgame. I'll be showing some variations that can easily spring about. So if you happen to be a teacher right now listening in and you're looking for an excellent game to share with one of your students on the endgame topic, king and pawn endgames, I think this is one to certainly have a closer look at. There's some really nice stuff packed into this one. We see a couple things happen early on. One is after these 5 moves, we stare at majorities. Fischer has a healthy 4 versus 3 queenside majority, whereas Addison has an unhealthy 4 versus 3 kingside majority. These terms, healthy, unhealthy, what am I talking about? A healthy majority is a majority that can, on its own, create a passed pawn. An unhealthy majority cannot. The other detail about this one, what happens early on? Well, the queens watch from the sidelines. Are we already in an endgame, or do you peg it as a queenless middle game? I tend to think of it more as an endgame. Who cares what it's called? Let's see what's happening. Currently, some pressure on c2. How to defend? Well, you could push the pawn, or you could back the bishop off. Fischer is not flipping a coin on this move 10. He's playing bishop b3 for a reason. He's already thinking about advancing his majority. You don't get that if you're just playing c3. The follow-up is rook to e8. Very sensible, open file. A move that's nice to flick in here as black is a5, provoking a4. You really don't want to see black put a pawn on white side of the board. And I believe it's black who benefits more with the a pawn advances inserted. And the reason I think this is because if white wants to continue like he does in this game with c4, there'd now be a serious drawback. The b4 square as a whole. Bishop can maybe go there if the knight is still home, can certainly pop in there in a couple moves and be a great menace to white's camp. In this game, Addison does not play a5. It is rook to e8. We get queenside castles for white. There goes the c-pawn, centralized rook. We get a light square bishop exchange in there. And now black is trying to get in to that e2 square with check, ready to kick a bishop. All right, Fischer's there, contesting the only open file. Bishop goes back to d2. Much more flexible than home base, has some squares along this diagonal. Knight f6, knight e5. There's pressure now on f4. It's defended with g5. Let me throw this position to you as a pop quiz. How would you improve your position here as white? Feel free to pause the video. Okay, there's no wonderful tactic here for white or anything. This is positional talk, let's say. Fischer's move is f3. Simple. When I say how can white improve the position, I think many might look at the position and try to find ways to improve the mobility of white's pieces. That's not always going to be possible. An improvement here can also be to simply limit an enemy piece. f3 knocks out a couple squares from this f6 knight. Additionally, f3, we can say, fixes a pawn on a dark square, which is good news for white. We are working with dark square bishops, and Fischer's bishop now constantly eyes up a potential target. All right, from here, knight h5, possibly ready to give the knight a kick. In comes knight g4, and the follow-up here is king g7. If black tries to kick the knight right now with f5, the knight can go to the edge and be effective. There's pressure on f5, and black is now very limited with how to defend it. Fianchetto the knight. This would be very awkward for black. The knight on h6 restricts the h-pawn, the g-pawn, and the knight. And one more, the king, currently now doesn't have any squares. So I tend to view it as the knight is killing a couple pawns, a knight, and the king. That's a lot. So, simple move first, king g7, maybe next ready to kick the knight, and you can't go forward. Bishop c3. Problem on the diagonal, king gets out of the line of fire. Follow up, rook takes rook, rook takes rook, and Fischer's move here is c5. When I initially went through this game, I thought to myself, his move c5 and then his follow-up, I really liked it. It is certainly a fine approach, but in the computer's eyes, there's even better. What's considered better is d5. Now, I'm going to show you a certain structure. I want to at least give you a feel for how you can approach this follow-up structure. d5 played with the intention to simply capture, open up a file for the rook. Computer says make sure that file doesn't open up and be okay giving white this big connected passed pawn. From here, the big plan is essentially to maneuver this knight to d3. Never be fearful of the rook giving a check. You can be okay exchanging rooks and basically play with b4. This is what it wants to do. Continuing to work with the majority, creating pawn exchanges. Now, in a situation like this, if black takes on b4, that opens up the d4 square eventually for the king. That would be a wonderful post for the white king. And the alternative, if black simply sits, here's an excellent sequence. You can give up bishop for knight and check out how amazing this knight is. Coordinates really well with the pawns. All of these squares are taken away from the black king. King can't go to c5. And the winning method here is to bring the king all the way up to b5 and then win c5. And if black takes that away, the a pawn would fall. So this is essentially the approach the computer has here. First, d5, maneuver a knight. In this one, it is c5. Now, proceed with caution. Don't simply blindly follow Fischer's move like this. If you're in a situation like this, there's an important positional detail to be mindful of when playing c5. c5 you might look at first as, oh, I'm attacking the bishop. That's true. The positional point, though, to certainly emphasize is that as soon as c5 is in, d5 is a hole. That's significant. That can easily be significant in other positions. If black is able to drop a piece on the d5 square and essentially nail down this now backward d4 pawn, it can easily collapse for white. But black is, in this current position, not able to get a piece on the d5 square. The follow-up here is bishop to b8. The bishop stays out of the way of a possible d5 and then d6 with tempo. Before Fischer plays this c5 move, he had to calculate, well, what am I doing if the bishop, let's say, stays on this diagonal? keeps pressure on c5. Well, he would still be able to follow up with d5 if that was the case, with the idea being to take on c6 and then win the pawn back like so. And white is still doing very well here, now working with a 2-1 majority. All right, in this game, Fischer goes with c5 and then d5. And the follow-up here, c takes on d5. This is a big error. The best move here for black is to kick the knight right now. By attacking the knight right now, it doesn't have the ability to move forward. White would have to run in reverse, and only after the knight goes in reverse does it suggest taking on d5. We're going to see why that move order detail matters. I want to give you a taste here for how play can continue. It's considered an even position here. How can black make forward progress? It suggests bringing the knight back in the ballgame and then basically pushing pawns like so. With the follow-up, rook to e3. And this pressure on f3 is a bit awkward now for white to defend against. In general, when combating this as white, when combating this unhealthy majority, one of the things that you should try and stay away from is initiating a pawn capture. If white in this position initiates a pawn capture, this is helping black to straighten out the pawns, and black can now create a passed pawn very easily. But there's also, the capture towards the center, following that general rule. And again, right around the corner, there's a passed pawn for black. Okay. The suggestion here is to basically defend against f3 like this, and we could easily have some kind of a back and forth because of this pressure on f3. Now, how black plays it, how are things significantly different? Well, by capturing on d5 right now and only one move later playing f5, well, the knight doesn't have to go to f2. The rook is on d5, supporting a big knight jump. And the knight basically has to go. What other options are there? If you go here, you're asking for trouble, discovered checks. If you go to the edge, well, king really doesn't want to be on the edge. It's the endgame. That's a demotion. King to h6. I had a quick look at what a couple follow-up moves can be here for white. This one you might find a little funny. White could give a check in this position if the knight, again, still lives. And this follow-up, knight in the corner pocket with check. We got defense. King would have to go back, and there you go. That's one way white can win a pawn. All right, in this game, black says, can't deal with that guy. Gotta go. Bishop takes knight it is. Rook takes bishop, follows. And black now plays knight to f6. If black ducks the rook exchange, for instance, with rook to c8, keeping pressure on something at least, restricting the rook, white could defend c5, which would free up the rook, and white's ready to go on the offensive one way or the other. In this game, it's knight f6, rook takes rook follows, knight takes rook, and in just this one move, bishop e5, we now essentially have ourselves a king and pawn endgame. The bishop from e5 completely dominates the knight. In bishop versus knight situations, this one here, where Fischer has a dark square bishop, if you ever put a knight on the edge on a light square, you run the risk of this very situation, of your opponent, in other words, bringing it to a king and pawn endgame position. The bishop currently doesn't have defense, but if defense is required, let's say the king goes in here, white is there in time to secure the bishop, and again, we essentially have a king and pawn endgame from this point on. In the game, we follow with king to h5. Now, if black plays in a different way, let's say the knight moves right now, you could simply take the knight. And I want to give you an idea of how exactly you can convert this as white. There's a way you can easily go wrong. The first step here should be to improve your king position. There's a mini race that should take place with the kings. And white should take up this strong post on c4. For what reason? Well, you box out the king from getting to the d5 square. And this is a situation you wouldn't want to see happen as white, where the black king can exert immediate pressure or direct pressure on the c-pawn. Now, once you have taken up this strong post with the king, now you're ready to advance with the pawns. I'm going to play out some more moves. How would you continue as white after a5? Well, don't play a3 because now it would be a draw. This would give black an opportunity to clamp down on the b pawn advance. This one pawn now kind of restricts two. And in order for white to make progress, you'd have to track down the a pawn, but then you'd be conceding important squares to the black king. The way to approach this as white would be to baby step it. White, do know in a situation like this, has all day, has all the time in the world to advance slowly. Black cannot, with this unhealthy majority, create a passed pawn. There's something you need to be careful of, though, keep in mind. Again, you want to stay clear of, as white, you don't want to initiate a capture. That's one important detail. And the other one is you want to basically have your pawns positioned as white so that they are happy. What am I talking about? Well, you basically want this arrangement right here. It's very important that the pawns are positioned as if they're smiling. Why is it important to have a white pawn on h3? In this position right here, this moment right here would already be an extremely critical moment for white. If you continue to simply develop or advance your queenside majority, black would now be winning. h3 would create additional tension. Black can now create a passed pawn. After takes, there's g3, no stopping the g-pawn. So the happiest arrangement for white is one where these pawns are smiling. Chop, 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 push, who cares? White is ready to continue advancing majority in the end. I could even go a little bit further. There's a way you could even go wrong in a situation like this. Don't be so quick to run over here and grab these pawns. You could do better, forcing the king all the way back here, and now you're ready to go. And after all of these moves right here, we're going to see all the black pawns end up getting scooped up. Of course, winning from here. All right. In this game, we do not see knight to f6. The king plays along the h file. Improvement for the white king. And we're ready to go. White is in a spot with the king on d3 to defend f3 in just a blink if needed. From here, a4. Pawn takes, king h4, b5, a takes b is met with, in this game, a5. Sort of the fancy approach, not necessary, though. White can simply capture on b5 as well and be winning. What would that look like? Well, the best approach here would be not to play c6, Black could take like this and eventually sacrifice the knight for the pawn. Best would be to play b6, with the idea to next play c6 and have this passed b pawn. The b pawn, the knight cannot stop, nor can the knight stop Fischer's a pawn, which is essentially what we see in this game. By playing a5, Fischer's idea is what? To follow with c6, and this will pave the way for a passed a pawn soon enough. Black knows this and simply resigns at this stage. What do? Chop a6, no stopping the a pawn. Again, this is, how I see it at least, a king and pawn endgame. The bishop and knight in a situation like this are really imaginary. Anyhow, feel free, as usual, to leave any feedback to this video in the comments section below. I hope you enjoyed it and maybe took a thing or two away. That's all for now. Take care.